with a new age, India-centric consumer business with very high growth potential. This will place Reliance in a select group of the most valuable companies in the world.
अच्छा सवाल आपने पूछा है। देखिए, हमारे देश में ये पीएसयूज का जन्म होता है, वो मरने के लिए ही होता है, ये हम भूले नहीं। किसी का बाल मृत्यु हो जाता है, किसी का युवा होने के बाद मृत्यु हो जाता है। कोई एक परिवार को डुबो करके मरता है तो कोई 50 परिवार को डुबो के मरता है, लेकिन मरना तय है। तो एक तो ये स्थिति है। अब इसके रास्ते खोजे गए, तो क्या रास्ते खोजे गए? या तो बंद कर दो या प्राइवेटाइज कर दो, दो रास्ते खोजे गए।
Some set of PSUs which could do much better in private hands. There are still a large number of them which are almost on the verge of closure, where people are going to lose employment. So given a choice between their continuing in the present shape or getting privatized, then the second option would be a preferable option.
In the 1950s, India was the mecca of all economists. You talk of any economist in the world, and they were advising the Indian government. And the advice was, you must have a state-led model of industrial growth.
Jawaharlal was a true believer of planned and phased development.
The 5-year plans are India's blueprints for progress.
He understood well that there is no magic wand for growth, and a complex and big nation needs a robust institutional base for a bright future.
The public sector must occupy what came to be called the commanding heights of the economy. And that's why steel, coal, machine tools, capital goods, all the areas of heavy industry were in the public sector and not in the private sector.
Time to introduce Milton Friedman, who will speak on the subject, the role of government in a free society. Thank you.
The view I'm expressing is a view that classically has been termed liberalism.
The economic model that Latin Americans call neoliberalism, Americans call the free market.
If we are going to maintain a free society, it is essential that you rely as little as possible on the political mechanism and as much as possible on the market mechanism of voluntary cooperation.
I'm talking about the very radical strain of what's sometimes referred to as Chicago School economics, the Milton Friedman view of the world, which holds that the only acceptable role for government is really to enforce contracts and to police borders, and everything else should be left to the market. So this is a very radical vision.
As can be seen by just listing some of the present governmental activities that cannot be justified in terms of these principles. You cannot along these grounds justify tariffs on imports or restraints on exports, or the current price controls on natural gas and oil. You cannot justify along these lines government control of output through farm programs, state oil commissions, Federal Energy Administration, the detailed control of industry through ICC, radio and television, which I think is a particularly pernicious control, cannot, in my opinion, justify along these lines compulsory Social Security.
You have an ideology that conveniently is a justification for greed. I mean, the ideology is pursue your greed, feed economic growth, and everything will be fixed in the trickle-down.
Throughout the world, governments always profess to be forward-looking. In practice, they are always backward-looking. The trouble here is that this industry exists only because the government has subsidized and supported it. The effect has been to inhibit the development, to prevent the growth, to prevent the dynamic activity that could otherwise develop out of the energies and abilities of the people of India.
Take me back to 1991, the summer of 1991. What exactly happened?
What we know is that when politicians try to do this during normal circumstances, people tend to organize and resist because they like their healthcare systems and they actually like having labor protections.
I saw at that time that India was in the midst of a deep crisis, and I started thinking what to do about it.
So the use of crisis for political ends has been a part of the advancement of this ideology.
India's foreign exchange reserves had been exhausted. People who had lent money to Indian banking system, they wanted their money back.
We were borrowing heavily. We had to mortgage gold deposits.
Unimaginable increase in unemployment, a sharp increase in inflation.
India faced the prospect of a default on her international obligations.
Our growth rate had come to virtually zero.
It was a complete breakdown of the economic system of India.
And remember, we were facing a crisis not of weeks or of months, but of days.
Because there was a debt crisis. That's another kind of a shock, and it was really hyped in the media. If we think back, endless rhetoric that our countries are going to go bankrupt unless we do deep welfare reform.
So was that the shock treatment we needed?
What economists often refer to as economic shock therapy, which is sort of a tsunami of policy. Privatization, deregulation, cuts to government spending.
We are a democracy, but we are also an indisciplined democracy. A crisis concentrates the mind probably as nothing else. Like I said, India is in the midst of a deep crisis. We are going to convert this crisis into an opportunity.
When the private banks won't lend to you, then you've got to do something if you're leader of a country. And typically what you've got to do is to cut back your spending in some way and try and get more money so that the impact of those cutbacks are not as severe as they otherwise would be. And it's at that point that you generally come to the IMF.
And the only option available to us, which was to go to the international financial institutions. So we went to the IMF, and the IMF said, well, we'll be glad to bail you out, but we want you to do certain things.
And we would say, yep, that's true. We understand the crisis you're in. And we need to fix the underlying reasons for that crisis. And so here is what we think needs doing.
Through the International Monetary Fund, through the World Bank, through the World Trade Organization, as conditions attached to loans that were needed during the economic crises, the so-called debt crisis.
And then we reach agreement on the set of measures on the budget, on the exchange rate, on monetary policy, on interest rates, on banks, on maybe privatization, and say, yep, we think this could solve your problem.
I had to do that because there were difficulties in going for the straightforward way.
The government is a means, an instrument through which we can jointly serve some of our ends.
But I have never been a socialist in the doctrinaire sense of the term, that all things must be done by the government.
As a philosophy, मेरा मत है, government has no business to do a business.
Sunil Mittal, representing industry. You represent big business here, which shifted its heavy financial and economic weight firmly behind Narendra Modi for the election. Is Modi doing what you asked and backed him for?
I think the answer is a resounding yes.
If you had one message for the foreign CEOs in the room, what would it be? And if you have one message for the Indian CEOs who are in the room, what would it be?
Well, I have one message for both of them. We are waiting for you.